Welcome to this session where we're presenting healthy communities and healthy places. Just a little housekeeping first, face-to-face. If you're here face-to-face and if you have any questions during the presentation, please wait until after the presentation is over. If you're online and you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in the Hoover control panel. We'll have 15 minutes for discussion at the end of this session. I'd like now to introduce our next presenter, Dr. Caroline Butler-Bowden. Dr. Butler-Bowden is the Executive Director, Public Spaces in the New Place Design and Public Spaces team at the New South Wales Department of Planning, Industry and Environment, where she leads a team of strategists, policymakers, place managers, landscape architects, project managers, planners and storytellers to improve and shine a light on public spaces in New South Wales. In this role, she leads the Premier's priority greener public spaces focused on quality and walkability to great public spaces. She was before this the Director of Strategy and Engagement at Sydney Living Museums. Spanning 20 years, her career has been dedicated to leadership that connects citizens and tourists to special places, the arts and heritage through a broad range of citywide public engagement programs, including festivals, exhibitions and books. Dr. Butler-Bowden is a 2017 Churchill Fellow with her fellowship focused on heritage precincts and tourism. She completed her PhD on the history of apartment living in Sydney in 2009. So please welcome Caroline Butler-Bowden.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I'm really delighted to be here. How exciting. World Urban Parks Congress. So, healthy communities and healthy places. You know, what a fantastic topic for Thomas and I to tackle this morning. I think when we think about health, we think about it in four ways. We think about our social health, our cultural health, our environmental health, and of course our economic health of public spaces. They're all the things I think that we think about in terms of the program that we're leading in place design and public spaces. It has the citizen at the heart, so community engagement is incredibly important. It's there in the tools that we've developed in the past 2 years, and of course it's in the programs that we've designed. So I'm going to talk about the how. I'm just going to go back to that slide. Sorry, we've got... I'm going to talk about the why, the how and the context to kick it off. The why, obviously, there's a number of different reasons why we need to focus on healthy places and healthy communities. Amenity and experience are obviously incredibly important. Health and well-being, obviously at the heart of this particular session. But it's also about economic recovery. It's all those issues of climate change that we've just heard about in Jeff and Michael's session. And it is very much focused on character, of course, is incredibly important. So in leading this government priority, it's been a pretty fascinating couple of years, really. And this really sums up our approach to leading the priority. We've really championed that storytelling part of the great public spaces that we already have. So advocacy and narrative has been incredibly important. Measuring value. How do we measure that community value for great public spaces and great places where they can enjoy, they can get physical activity, respite, escape from their daily lives. Systems change, we heard a bit about that from Alex O'Mara, incredibly important. Takes longer, but is probably the most important legacy of the work that we've been leading. Citizen engagement, absolutely at the heart of what we've been doing. And of course, big and small ideas. We just heard about the big moves. I think they really matter, but it's also the small ideas that can affect change and get people to think about their neighbourhoods and public spaces slightly differently. And then, of course, the top-down and bottom-up approach. So our context and our drivers. This is the priority that we've been leading, but of course it's about how we can use that to, as I've said there, to thrive, experiment and thrive, not just survive. How can we use COVID as that chance to try different things and how to quicken the pace of reform? How can we support business in the development of this? And then how does that help us providing a new window in the conceptualisation of our public spaces and our healthy places, our parks, places like our libraries, our streets and so forth. So our health and public spaces has never been more in the news. You know, it was that funny thing in the past couple of years where it was on the front page of our newspapers, the fact that our worlds had retracted to being only within 5 kilometres. So it really mattered what was within 5 kilometres. And we've heard a lot about equity and equitable access this morning. Incredibly important, I think, in what we've learnt in the past year, that being able to walk to a park is incredibly important. Being able to have great local high streets, having libraries and other types of public facilities within 5, 10 minutes of home also matter. So there we have it. We were reading about things across the world and of course responding in the best way that we could through policy and programs in New South Wales. So today I'm going to talk in sort of 3 sections. I like to think about from the perspective of the research and citizen engagement. That keeps us honest in terms of what we need to do in the program that we're leading, the framework and tools that we've been developing, and obviously how that research and that development of the framework and tools feeds into the program design and that record investment in public space that we have seen in the past year. So what we've learnt from the community, we've just released this second tranche of research. Very early on in COVID, we went to the community to find out what they were making of what they were seeing. And they told us that they were loving their parks much more than ever before, that they were walking more, that they were cycling more. You know, we saw the long queues on Parramatta Road for 99 bikes. You know, I took photos at the time. You know, there was this real re-exploration of the local and the neighbourhood had never mattered more. And it was like, it was a kind of a new understanding of walkings one's local streets when that was all we had. So you can see that kind of growth in different activities too, and that thing of nature and the power of nature. And I know we'll hear more about that from Thomas. So what we found, of course, it was 56% walked more during COVID and 49% cycled more. We did two rounds of this research. And more recently, just before this second major lockdown in 2021. But what we saw, there was indeed growth too. So it wasn't a one-hit wonder in 2020. We actually saw growth of people wanting and valuing their public space even more so. So as ever, we took a number of insights from those. People were discovering more of their online services that related to public space. I love the 1 second city that we just heard from Jeff Roberts. There's a real value in that, I think, and I'll talk a tiny bit more about that later. People were socialising in public spaces. I've never seen so many picnics in my life. There was a kind of health and well-being aspect when people couldn't go back to cafes and restaurants, but they took their they could meet up to 5 people, family and friends, in public spaces. And of course, they were using their high streets more than ever. What were we seeing globally? You know, obviously in recreation, people love walking links and loops. Think of the Bay Run, the Nepean Walk, Narrabeen Lakes. You know, there's huge growth in people seeking health and recreation in these places. Personal choice, obviously the factor of places being universally accessible, incredibly important. And having places that are close to home matter, as well as those destination parks and places. All our work responds to research that we're conducting. So this is the Greater Sydney Outdoors Study. Of course, we see 85% of people want to walk, hike, run in their parks and their public spaces. It's broken down across the different districts of Greater Sydney, and we're looking forward to doing the same survey in regional New South Wales next year. The Charter we heard a little bit about this morning. We're so excited about the Charter. I think when we embarked on this, we thought it would be a 6-month project. And 2 years later, my colleague is smiling in the room, who led this amazing piece of work. 10 principles, incredibly important. This needs to be timeless. It needs to be something that people are using in 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. It's scalable. It can be used for a local pocket park right through to a major precinct. I encourage you all to go online and discover it. We put out an engagement report because we went on the road with this charter and talked to so many different people that helped inform it. And one thing that we really learnt was through the Aboriginal engagement that we did, we had a kind of a separated out principle that focused on connecting with country. But of course the feedback quite rightly came back that it needed to be embedded across all the principles. So that's where that kind of real engagement with people throughout that development of new policy and programs is obviously of vital importance. Obviously, equity and inclusion and community engagement are the other 2 macro themes that cross the 10 principles. Our evaluation tool of public space, public life, I often say to the team, if we're not in the room, how do people know how to plan for, design, manage, evaluate public space? They can go online and see all of our materials, including this wonderful, very simple, deceptively simple 4 questions that you can ask. Am I able to connect? Am I able to play and participate? Am I able to stay? And am I able to get there? This grew out of some amazing work with Everyone Can Play about building inclusive play spaces across New South Wales. I think we're now up to about 120 and more to be announced soon. And you can see that amazing picture of that sort of coalition of community members to create and champion for inclusive play spaces, which was at the kind of well of ideas that has led to the development of the tools. And they're the design principles that, of course, we then built into the other tools. As I say, everything's online. It's 2-page. It's really simple. You can do it in 15 to 30 minutes on a local part right through to something much bigger. And a number of different ideas and interventions and other types of things that the team have put together. And it's in multiple languages. Incredibly important that there is inclusivity and accessibility in all the materials that we are developing. This is a piece of work that Vanessa Gordon is leading at the moment about walkable places. How do we embed those principles into our local neighbourhoods and creating walkable places? That is at the absolute heart of healthy communities. We know that. The research is in people, and we just need to start to really embed that in the planning, of course, of all our areas. We've heard a tiny bit about the kind of massive investment in public space. This legacy program, incredibly proud of this. You can't see the projects yet, but in the next 2 years, by the end of December 2022, this time next year, you'll be able to see those 100 plus projects. They're parks, they're street upgrades, they're these wonderful projects that are addressing open space shortfalls. They're supporting investment of local public spaces. And they're also about connecting the network, we've heard about that, and significantly enhancing the quality of open space. Another one of our key investment programs is the 50 million Parks for People project. It's across growth areas of Sydney, and these are knockout parks. They're parks that will be there for locals, but also, I suspect, will become destinations. What's I think really particular about this program has been the community engagement. We've gone to the community 3 times across those 8 parks, lots of different voices about what they wanted. They wanted places to relax and that were quiet. They also wanted places that were fun. They wanted all sorts of things. And it taught me too that obviously the parks and places that we're building or improving need to be flexible, open and accessible. They need to do a multitude of different things depending on the audience and the people using them. It's not all about parks. I love parks, but we've also been leading a lot of work to do with streets. And we've recently announced this 38 million. And watch this space, January to June next year, you'll start to see all sorts of exciting things happening, particularly in the 12 former LGAs of concern, those areas of Sydney that were hit hardest by the pandemic, and also in the city of Sydney. Then there's a whole lot of different programs also across the state with streets as shared spaces. Every single program we do, we measure. Is this working? What are we learning from this particular project? And there are core indicators. Once again, they're online, and they help us to test whether some of this experimentation is working. And it's in addition, of course, to all the different types of ideas that the team workshop and work really hard to develop to give others ideas on different ways to improve place and increase healthiness. And there's some of the projects of Streets as Shared Spaces. There's several that are still happening, Kirribilli and North Sydney and DY and all sorts of places across the state. So please, if you are in New South Wales, seek those out. Places to roam, places to swim, places to play. One thing we learnt in the Greater Sydney Outdoors Survey is the desperate need for places to swim in Western Sydney. That comes back to that equity issue. So that's where our program design is informed by the type of research that we're doing. Equally, places to play. We have loved our inclusive play spaces. What we were also told, there was a real need for pump tracks, adventure trails, adventure play spaces. So that's what that program is about. Once again, it's got community health and wellbeing as the main program objective. It builds on a festival that we've been running for the past 2 years. It's not your 10-day festival that people kind of think of. It's 365 days of the year. It has our tools and other sorts of things at the heart. There's a lot online, but it's also this expression in some of our other sites, whether it's in Western Sydney Parklands or the Rocks or Darling Harbour or in Wagga and other places where we have developed different programming. And I'm going to end on public spaces near me. We're about to launch this before Christmas. In your palm of your hand, you will know what are the local great public spaces near you. We've also worked with councils with hidden gems in their local area. And I think that's your 1 second city that then leads to your 5 and 10 minute walkable neighbourhood city that also leads to your 30-minute city when you might be seeking out the big destination public spaces near you. So it's free resource designed for community promotion of walking and public spaces and a real celebration of the great public spaces that we have. So that's that map. I expect you all to feedback how it works for you over the Christmas period when you're out and about. And if you're across the world, please look at it. We'd love feedback once it goes out. And of course then the new Premier Perrottet, announced the Sydney Great Walk. Obviously we've all been doing the Great Sydney Walk probably for many years, but this will be in the palm of your hand and will obviously locate some of the great sites along the way. I'm a historian by training, a museum curator, funnily enough. He's ended up in the Department of Planning. And I always go back to history. And here we have Henry Parkes and the opening of Centennial Park. We've heard about the incredible impact of Western Sydney Parklands. And there's just a lot in the words that he uses. By your own hand, you'd planted the flowers, and if you take an interest in it, that this is a kind of great privilege. These parks are incredibly important to our lives and have been the lifeblood, I think, during the pandemic. So it will be yours, and so long as the land shall last, it will be for you. And it's that great obligation, I think, on all of us as place leaders across the globe to really nurture those places and seek out ways of making improvements and growing the number. That's where I started my day. I fitted in a really quick run on the Cooks River. It's my local place, and I know that if I didn't have that at the end of my street, I think my staff wouldn't thank me for my behaviour during the day if I didn't have access to great space. And this is our final framework developed by Vanessa Gordon in my team. And I always come back to this. It's about the cultural, economic, social and environmental health of our cities and our regions and our places, and how we convert public spaces to being public spaces to becoming places and cherished by the community. Thank you.
Thank you to Dr. Caroline Butler-Bowden. Our next presenter today is Professor Thomas Astle-Burt from the University of Wollongong. Professor Astle-Burt is a Professor of Population Health and Environmental Data Science at the University of Wollongong and the founding co-director of the Population Wellbeing and Environment Research Lab. Professor Astle-Burt has led and co-authored more than 180 publications in various aspects of social and environmental epidemiology, with specialist expertise in green spaces and health outcomes across the life course. Professor Astle-Burt has won more than $10 million in research income, including 3 fellowships, and successfully translated his research into health and urban planning policies. It's over to Professor Thomas Astle-Burt.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and also to the organisers for this wonderful event, and to colleagues in DPI for the invitation to speak with you today. I would also like to pay my respects and acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet. The land, the environment, more generally across the world, is so precious to us, and reckless and inadvertent and negligent decisions over decades have put it into peril, as was made very, very clear at the COP26 earlier this year. So, with that in mind, it is absolutely tremendous and what a wonderful honor to be among people here today who are listening to science and are making a difference, who are actually getting things done to improve the qualities of the environments, the cities in which we live, so everyone can benefit. I mentioned the science. That's where I come in a little bit, I think. As an epidemiologist, many of you will be aware over the last few years now that the word epidemiology is almost synonymous with bad news. I want to change that. I want to provide you with a little bit of good news for once, and here for the remainder of my talk is going to be an avalanche of hopefully wonderful news to support all the wonderful things that you've heard from today and indeed across the conference. So, the people who are producing this science, as mentioned earlier, is the POWER Lab, the Population Wellbeing and Environment Research Lab, which I co-founded in 2016. This is here, us, a little while ago before you know what emerged, beginning with C. 12 to 20 or so early career researchers, PhD students, postdocs, and academic researchers, and in fact, actually a whole lot more across that time period. We get together, we do research together, we celebrate research wins, we commiserate in the losses. It's good to be part of a thriving and young team. Why is green space good for our health? Well, actually, I think a lot of people will have some intuition about that, and probably a lot of first-hand experience too. But in fact, only in the last few years have we really started to try and form big conceptual models that try and bring together all of what we know. This was the group that brought what is now considered, I think, the seminal model of how green space influences our health. It was, by invitation only, an international workshop of experts in environmental health at Ludwig Maximilian University in 2016, way back in Munich. A really jolly lot from all over the world. And here's one of the key things that we came up with. Published, free to download, I think, and if not, contact me and we can have a talk and I can set you up with it. This is a fantastic resource which basically says the way that we can consider green space influencing health is through 3 domains of pathways. The first, getting you up off the mat after a particularly hard day psychologically, and also reducing levels of stress that may occur throughout the day, whatever it is that people are experiencing. That's restoring pathways, the restoration hypotheses of which there are numerous now. Then, through the middle, there's building capacities, and in true Monty Python fashion, this is the pathway of the bleeding obvious. Green spaces can be attractive places to get outdoors, to walk, to cycle, to run, to be with other people or be on your own, whatever you choose, whatever you need. More than that, though, there's emerging research, including papers from my lab, which suggests outdoors, being in nature, can help us to sleep a little bit better too, to build up resources for relaxing throughout the day, to connect with people, to reduce levels of loneliness. I'll talk a little bit about that later. And finally, reducing harms. That particularly relevant in places like Sydney, reducing the air temperatures, but also buffering us from the terrible smog that comes out of the back of cars and buses, and, well, not buses into the future, of course, when we have electric buses, but trucks and all the rest of it, improving the air quality, and also reducing annoying noise as well. So there you have it, 3 different domains of pathways. And here's some of the research that we've been doing in the Power Lab. We take a life course approach. We're not just interested in people in a particular age, we're interested in all age groups, right from the moment we are born. And so here's where we'll start. One of our PhD students put together all of the work that was done on birth weight and green space throughout the world. And what she was able to find is that mothers who are living in areas which are more green, doesn't matter whether it's Sydney or a city in Canada or other parts of the world, it tends to be the case that greener areas promote a healthier birth weight. Why is that important? Low birth weight is a consistent predictor of obesity and cardiovascular disease and diabetes later on in life. So anything that we can do to support healthier birth weights is an investment not only in healthy babies, but an investment in health across the life course. It's a fantastic result. But that's not all. Through into childhood, Xiaoqi Feng, who's a co-director in Power Lab, found this, that not only more green space is good, and 20% or more within the suburb is associated with better mental health in children, but also the quality of the green space that happens to be there too. Why? Well, it probably is the case that unless there's quality green space nearby, which is seen by parents as good places to be, as safe places to be, then young children probably aren't going to be able to have access to it because they're chaperoned by their parents. So quality green space, in the eyes of the parents, so important to translate that into health benefits among children. And not just mental health, but also pro-social behavior. There is evidence now, again, one of my PhD students has led this, that more quality green space nearby is associated with kindness, with sharing, with pro-social behavior among children. Now, I don't know about you, but I sure think that we in the world could do with a lot more kindness nowadays. Quality green space may help us get there. Now let's move into adulthood. First of all, I mentioned pregnancy earlier. It's not just health benefits for the babies, also for the moms. Over time, a national cohort of mothers across Australia, we found, led by Xiaoqi Feng, that more quality green space nearby was associated with a 26% reduction in the odds of developing psychological distress in the postpartum period. More green space in general did not seem to have similar bang for buck. It was when the green space was thought to be quality, as a safe place, as a good place, as an attractive place to go, a place which fulfills one's needs. That's where the benefit came. And that's where all the great work which has been done, particularly as mentioned by Caroline earlier on quality green space, is going to matter so much now and into the future. Here's a new one, which I led earlier this year. We've been talking a lot about loneliness recently, particularly around the COVID-19 pandemic. In Australia, upwards of 27% of us adults at any point in time are feeling lonely on at least 3 days a week. It's not a trivial matter. It's related to a whole heap of things later in life which we would really rather avoid, such as cardiometabolic and neurodegenerative diseases. What can we do to prevent it? Investing in green space may help. What we were able to find over a course of a 4-year period in adults across Australia was that those who had 30% or more parkland nearby, within a short walk from home, had a quarter reduction in the odds of becoming lonely. That's in adults in general, and accounting for other competing explanations such as income and age and relationship status. But on relationship status, it gets even more interesting. Living on our own does not mean one will be lonely, but it can increase the risk. Among people who are living alone, we found hitting a 30% greening target is associated with a halving of the risk of becoming lonely. A half, ladies and gentlemen. This is fantastic, considering existing interventions for loneliness are typically weak or ineffectual. Now we have evidence to say there is something we can do about it for everyone. Loneliness is related to mental health, and that's where this other work is another paper I led. What we found was that hitting a 30% tree canopy target within a walking distance from home, about 1.6 kilometers, was associated with a 31% reduced risk of developing psychological distress over about 6 years. This is work done on people aged 45 years and older in Sydney, in Wollongong, in Newcastle. In other words, this is evidence here among local populations which will help to drive local policy making. Not only that, not just mental health, but also cardiometabolic diseases too. Similar levels of risk reduction in terms of preventing diabetes. Also, reduced odds of heart disease by 22%, reduced odds of hypertension by 19%. These aren't trivial reductions, and it just goes to show more green space isn't just a matter of improving the vitality and the aesthetic and the utility of the environments. It's an investment in people's health. And I'm so glad that people are listening to this science. As mentioned earlier, but also the Sydney Greening Strategy, which came out earlier this year, directly citing this work. The Wollongong Greening Strategy, a few years ago now, directly citing this work. Not just urban planners, but health professionals too. Up in Western Sydney, the Western Sydney Diabetes has been championing this work and investments in green space in places like Blacktown and Mount Druitt, where there are significant health issues, and an environment which is more healthy promoting, more livable, more green, will really help to keep people healthy and out of hospital. So with that, if I were to summarize, investments in high-quality green spaces, as you already know, not only important from various different reasons, but also for promoting better health across the life course, and also ensuring that people have opportunities to walk to those lovely salubrious spaces where they can spend their time. That means under canopy cover, which is often easy to do in places like the North Shore and eastern suburbs in Sydney, but rather more difficult in the western suburbs, say in Blacktown here. This is a health equity issue. This is an environmental justice issue, which we've been hearing about a lot from reports in the New York Times and various others across the world. It's also an issue here, and we need to correct for that through solid, equity-focused urban planning. But it's not only that we need to do. We also need to get the health sector on board in terms of enabling and empowering people to spend more time in nature than they currently do. We found that less than 20 to 25% of people in Australia spend sufficient time in green space that would be decent for their health. And that is important to change. We've started to do this already. Here, well, we might say, how would we do that? Nature prescriptions may be part of that. Going to see your GP or your clinician or whomever it is, and they will give you the standard care that's required, but also, maybe as an adjunct to that, a written recommendation to spend more time in local park, to volunteer in bush generation, to be part of a local community green space or garden or some other way in which we can get people outdoors. This is being done in Canada. It started during the pandemic and it's going all guns blazing. Here we are talking about it and we want to change that. Nourish is the center which is going to catalyze that change, which Xiaoqi and I am leading, bringing together stellar researchers from across Australia and also people who are committed to making change in society. Nourish is the National Observatory for Urban and Regional Interventions in Sustainability and Health. Effectively, we want to try and include everyone within the context of urban greening, get the health sector on board so we can have a national nature prescribing strategy. If this sounds up your street, join us. And with that, I just want to quickly summarize, leave you with a final thought. I think the evidence, as Caroline very much said, is in. We want to create healthier environments. In doing so, we will support more regenerative industries like urban forestry, which is helping to make our cities greener. And in doing so, we will help to make sustainable healthcare a reality. A way to sum this up is we should cherish the planet we're living on. It's the only one we have. Thank you very much.
Professor Astelberg, thank you very much. And I'll also invite Dr. Caroline Butler-Bowden to take a seat and we'll have some time here for Q&A. Just a reminder, if you'd like to ask a question, please put it into the control panel in the Hoover app and we'll have a few minutes here for questions. Thank you both. That was immensely insightful and it's really interesting to see data around that connection between health and our urban parks. Has it always been this case that we've recognised this link on one level or another?
Oh, look, I think there's been research for decades, hundreds of years actually. The academic's nodding, so that tells me that answer is right. But I do think that COVID did enable us to kind of almost restate that love for parks. And I think once our world reduced, and it was kind of the only place too that we were able to walk freely in, obviously masked and the rest of it, people thought about their own being, their own personal their kind of body within public space. I think everything we kind of rethought, and I think the key is we went back to the essentials of actually what matter in life, and that was one of those things. Access to green space, was one of those critical things.
Totally agree, and I would add to that I think we've had this inkling for a long, long time, hundreds of years, thousands of years, of course, that green is good in some capacity. The key, I think, is that now we are getting to the stage where we have sophisticated ways of measuring this, which also enables us to be accurate about what the research is able to show, and also to deliver the bigger questions, such as more green space, more time in nature, we feel more relaxed. Great, we've known that for decades, but now we're able to connect that to health service provision. So we're able to say, does more green space help to keep people out of hospital as well and put an economic cost on that? That's new.
And I think...
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I think the other thing that I would add is that Thomas's research and others has really shone a spotlight too within that lens of mental health. I think that's being talked about so, in such a major way now, and, it's very much part of media and all the rest of it. And I think that your work has as you say, has enabled a much more sophisticated reading of why it matters. You know, reducing anxiety, improving mood, you know, reducing loneliness and all those other contributors, I think, to poor mental health.
It was really interesting where you talk about, you know, this idea of consulting community and getting people out as a medical prescription out into their parks and open spaces to volunteer, to engage with those spaces. When you consult with communities, are they can they articulate it quite in those terms that this is what I need to go and do to engage in those public spaces? Because most lay people like me wouldn't necessarily think of it with such clarity.
Oh yes, I mean, I think what we heard through that planning for those new parks, people know exactly what they want to see. Actually, I think parks and other sorts of places is where they have often their most joy in their lives. It often bookends their day. It's where they take their children to play, where they walk their dog, where they have time with family and so forth. And I think, you know, when prompted perhaps with different ideas about what they want to see and the rest of it, that they're very clear actually on what matters.
There's also a big range, isn't it? You want festival spaces, adventure spaces, play spaces.
Yeah.
Where do you begin trying to meet all those needs and desires?
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a good question. You can't always do that. It's hard to provide escape and respite whilst you're also planning for, you know, the all-important mountain bike tracks and skate parks and other sorts of things. It depends on the demographic and the age range and the rest of it. But I think that's where inclusivity really is important, how we can make our parks and the rest of it as open and accessible and as flexible. That's the one thing I've really learnt, that flexibility. And Fiona Morrison, who leads our Open Spaces team, that is the thing that she says again and again, that flexibility to enable festivals and other things, but also enable quiet. Because quietness is an incredibly important part of why people seek out parks.
Thomas?
Totally agree. In fact, some of the work that one of my honours students did feels like 100 years ago now, but just a few years ago, was shown that those parks which are more attractive for sports and exercise aren't necessarily the places that people would prefer to go to get peace and quiet, to spend some time with a loved one, to have a picnic or whatever it may be. And that really picks up on not only what Caroline was saying, but also previous speakers around the networks of parks that we would like to facilitate and promote. In fact, just down the road from here, a very high-density community in Zetland, I think is a really good example of this from my own personal point of view, because it has this central park there, which is a real hive of activity, a little coffee shop nearby, lots of dog walkers, people running around, but that's not the only park in the area. Within a 30 seconds walk of this very walkable community, a small park with a little tennis court and basketball hoop and all the rest of it, and a couple of other parks nearby with children's playgrounds, beautiful jacaranda trees, a library and all the rest of it. It shows that you can have a network of really high quality parks within a short walk from each other in one of the highest density communities in the country. And I think we need more of that.
How readily can those quality public spaces be created on demand, or is it a very organic thing that evolves over time? I mean, you showed that very stark difference between, I think, the picture on the North Shore versus Bankstown in Western Sydney. Is that a product of a very old neighbourhood that's had time to evolve, grow big trees, and, you know, local community sort of being really accustomed to the environment, versus a very big migrant community in Western Sydney, very highly developed? How organic are these things, and how much can that sort of environment be created on demand? Thomas?
Thank you very much for the question. I think that I'm the least qualified person in the room to answer it, though, with regards to urban planning. So I might defer to my colleague here.
Look, I think it's what Jeff Roberts was talking about, you know, the Greater Sydney Commission and that planning. He talked to the differences and across the three cities, and of course we've now heard that there's the thought about the 6 cities was announced by the Premier last week. So it is about equity, and it is about sometimes, I think he used the word reversing some of the the kind of urban planning of the
The
past.
legacy
I think between
issues,
the
yeah.
minister, the legacy issues, and that is often so retrofitting suburbs to enable that, but planning's incredibly important. I mean, you know, I quoted from Henry Parkes, that thing of being able to look forward to something that we're using 130, 150 years on. Same with Western Sydney parklands. Obviously, we need to do more of the kind of very major planning. And I think we heard about the kind of the local network really matters, but it was the big moves as well. And the big moves, of course, are those really big kind of local, but also destination parks that can do all those have all those flexibility built into them. So there's multiple experiences they can be used on a daily basis, but also perhaps for, you know, major events and other sorts of things.
You both spoke about climate as well. This is going to be very conceivably a huge issue in the next 50 to 100 years for us. In mitigating some of the effects, particularly on those sort of very hot parts of Western Sydney. How are we going with that? Do you think we're on the right trajectory and moving quickly enough? When you look at the health data and the health outcomes, where is it headed?
The American Heart Association published a couple of years ago a paper which was provocatively titled 27 Different Ways in Which Excess Heat Will Kill You. We need to do more. We always need to do more to get more trees into the ground, and not just trees which look nice but are not necessarily providing a lot of shade. The big trees which will help us to get more people outside, to be walking, to be cycling, those short trips which a lot of people will just get into the car to do. The investments which I see being made in places such as Blacktown and in Campbelltown are truly inspiring and hugely encouraging, and I think that we just need to keep accelerating that to ensure that people growing up in these communities have the same opportunities that those of us who live in the eastern suburbs, the North Shore, the more leafy parts of Sydney, enjoy on the day-to-day basis.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you both very, very much. Thomas, Caroline, really terrific to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.
Now, I've just got a bit of final information here to wrap up this session. As an addition to Sydney's host day for the World Urban Parks Congress, we're announcing a masterclass workshop that'll take place next week. The theme for the workshop is innovative ways to consult and engage with the community, whole of city and across diverse interest groups. There'll be 5 presenters from Greater Sydney Parklands and 4 international participants, all leaders in their field. The workshop will be led by Greater Sydney Parklands, who will present on this important theme and also highlight the challenges the agency faces itself. International participants will be able to share their insights, experiences and advice too. It'll be the first time that the Congress has undertaken this type of session and promises to be a very insightful, informative and educational session for anyone who works in the area of community engagement. The masterclass will take place Sydney time, 7 a.m. Tuesday the 14th of December. That's Sydney time, 7 a.m. Tuesday the 14th of December. For most of you watching around the world, that'll be Monday most likely. The full details will be on the Hoover app, where you can find the local time for your area. So we'll leave it there for this session. The next one will begin shortly.